So joining us next, we've got Devon Stortz from the Rock Creek Watershed here in Mitchell County, and Doug Johnson, Floyd County. He drove a long ways, right?
Oh, yeah.
Yep, from the Charles City Watershed. So we're lucky enough to have these two joining us to hopefully clear up the muddy waters of NRCS programs. I think that's one of the biggest things that can be a little confusing of what do I qualify for? What's the best way to make the program work, get the best bang out of those funding dollars. So.
Thanks, Rachel.
Oops, looks like we're working. That didn't work so well. I'll stick it in the pocket here. Well, good morning. Gee, that's pretty loud. I wanted to visit with you folks, Devon and I did, about what's available in the way of technical and primarily financial assistance through mostly USDA and NRCS, Natural Resources Conservation Service, or Iowa Department of Ag and Land Stewardship, Division of Soil and Water Conservation. But there are also some other nonprofits and other organizations that do have some financial assistance available for different conservation practices. Let's see, I guess this would just be forward. Forward button, let's see, is it the top button? There we go. No, I turned it on.
Should be the arrow.
Arrow one way or the other.
Okay, there we go. There you go. I'm Doug Johnson. I'm the Watershed Project Coordinator for the Charles City Watershed. But what I have to talk about, and what Devon has to talk about, is not just limited to those watersheds. This is just conservation, technical, and financial assistance in general. Devon didn't give me a good picture, maybe shy, I don't know. But anyway, Devon is a Watershed Project Coordinator for the Rock Creek Watershed up here in Mitchell County. And most of our work is with, primarily in our small watersheds, working with producers to put in practices that reduce potential nitrate loss to the environment or phosphate loss to the environment. So water quality in particular, and soil health management. But as far as technical assistance goes, NRCS and their partners can provide planning, design, practice, installation, oversight. What I recommend to everybody is that if you're thinking about any kind of conservation practice, stop at NRCS first. That's sort of the best clearinghouse for where maybe to go next if NRCS doesn't have that technical assistance or that financial assistance, or you can't get it through one of our partners at that location. So start at NRCS, primarily to get a plan developed for what you want to do that'll meet your objectives. And if you're interested in financial assistance from a program, will meet the requirements of whatever that program will be. So that's your starting place. So what are some of the financial assistance opportunities? I'm going to call this Financial Assistance 101 because there's a lot of information we're not going to cover because you don't want to sit here all day and have me throw numbers at you or Devon. So this is going to introduce you to those programs. Some of you may be utilizing and involved in a number of these programs. Some of you may not have experience with hardly any of them. So if you have a lot of experience, bear with me. This is 101. So through USDA and NRCS, I'll use a lot of acronyms. On the back table there by Dean, I have a summary sheet that is your dictionary for acronyms. So I apologize if I say an acronym you didn't know what that was. That sheet will help clear it up, but I'll try and utilize full names. Let's just start out right away and get this one out of the way. If you have any interest in wildlife habitat of some kind, or perennial native seedings, or even tree plantings for wildlife purposes, Fish and Wildlife Service or the Iowa Department of Natural Resources may be a good spot, may be a good fit for you. Outside of that, as their names imply, they're wildlife habitat oriented. So that's a potential source. And that's all we'll talk about that. So through the USDA NRCS, I apologize for having to look around, but the main sources of funding that are out there, and there's a lot of new funding, but the main sources of funding for any NRCS programs are going to come from the Infrastructure Investment and Jobs Act. Some people refer to that as the Bipartisan Jobs Act. Or the Farm Bill conservation programs, which you're pretty familiar with, and the new Inflation Reduction Act. And that Inflation Reduction Act is a big ticket item as far as increase in funding that's available. As far as the Infrastructure Investment and Jobs Act, I'm not going to go into that a lot. There's a lot of money, close to $1 billion, that has been appropriated for watershed projects. We may have some, and for flood control, so that may be something in the future that you'll see in caution or funding for farming practices with, but mostly that's going to be structural measures to manage flood. Farm Bill conservation programs and the Inflation Reduction Act funding is what I want to focus on today, because those are the two programs that you're most likely to be involved in if you're looking at USDA funding. Farm Bill conservation programs, how much money's out there? We don't know, we haven't passed the Farm Bill. As is normally keeping, it may be at least a year after the last one expired before we have a new one, but they're working on it. I can tell you that in the past, it was about $30 billion that was appropriated in the Farm Bill over a 5-year period. Should be similar to that, I hope it's that anyway, for the next Farm Bill. But Farm Bill practices, if it protects or improves soil productivity, if it improves soil health, if it protects water quality, if it conserves energy, if it reduces greenhouse gas emissions, or if it is a benefit to wildlife or wildlife habitat, there's probably a Farm Bill program for it. Major Farm Bill programs. EQIP is our contracting program. 1 to 5 years, you develop an agreement to do a conservation practice, a combination of practices over a period of time, and you lock in that agreement, that financial agreement with the USDA. So if something happens to funding somewhere else, that funding's already set aside for that project. RCPP, you'll hear that a lot. It's just another type of EQIP, except it's focused in certain areas. RCPP is a Regional Conservation Partnership Program. We're blessed in this area to have 3 RCPP areas. What that does is it brings additional amount of funding to that area. I mean, as you look at the maps, this is the Cedar River Source Water Partnership. Mitchell and Floyd are in that. But basically, it's the drainage area of the upper and middle Cedar River. So if your watershed flows into the Cedar River, you're probably in the RCPP area. Specific practices that are focused in that area: cover crops, no-tills, edge of field practices like bioreactors, saturated buffers, wetlands. You'll see a lot of the same practices. You're going to see cover crops and no-tills, and cover crops and no-till quite a bit through these programs. The Iowa Systems approach to conservation drainage, we're in that area as well. That's a huge RCPP funded area. Again, cover crops, no-tills, bioreactors, wetland restoration, drainage water management. Anything that's going to help to improve the profitability of heavily drained areas and work towards reducing nitrate loss and phosphate loss to the environment out of those intensively drained areas. And the Midwest Ag Water Partnership. Again, most of our counties around here are in that. That said, I just wanted to show you that there's a lot of funding that's right in our neighborhood. It's exclusively for this area. So what's it take to be eligible for EQIP or RCPP? Well, if you're an operator or a owner of land, you're probably eligible. Check with NRCS to see if there's a practice and if you're eligible for it. So, but you probably are if you farm or if you own that land. Conservation Stewardship Program. Some of you may be familiar with that program. It's a different animal. The CSP is designed to, quote, reward you for presently utilizing an effective conservation program and entice you into improving on that some more. It's a 5-year, minimum of 5-year contract or commitment that you would have, and it's for operators of the land. Somebody who's designated as an operator at FSA, Farm Service Agency, and that individual needs to put all of their operation into the CSP. There are some exceptions to that. If you have different counties and you own land or farmland in different counties, you may be able to separate those. But you're making a commitment for your operation for a long period of time to continue to utilize certain conservation practices and improve on those. I got ahead of myself. The Conservation Reserve Program, most of you have probably heard of that, but of course it's for perennial ground cover for 10 to 15-year contracts. Check with FSA if you're thinking of any kind of a perennial long-term seeding for wildlife habitat or cash rent or whatever it might be. Again, to be eligible for that, you need to be a landowner. FSA does work with landowners and operators together on how that payment is made, that rental payment is made, but since it's a long-term contract, the owner has to sign off on that. And at present, until the next farm bill, you had to have a crop history for the 6 magic 2012 to 2017 years for a piece of ground to be eligible for CRP. I'm not going to cover much on CRP. It's a huge program. Check with FSA for all the different options that are out there. We're here to talk about cover crops and soil quality and water quality. CRP seedings are excellent for that. But you'll also hear of a program called the ACEP, Ag Conservation Easement Program. That is a selling an easement to put land into basically permanent, 30 to permanent year retirement. So we won't cover that. But you need to be the landowner for that program. Conservation Technical Assistance is what we had before we had equipment, before we had RCPP. Everything went into the Conservation Technical Assistance Program. It's not funded very well, but it covers just about everything. So you might get funding through that. But you need to be the owner or the operator. But the Inflation Reduction Act of 2022 is the newest source of a lot of potential funding. $19.5 billion is going to go into is in that program for the next 5 years. And so that is basically almost as large as the Farm Bill programs alone. So we're doubling at a minimum the amount of funding that's available or will likely be available over the next 4 years than what was available a couple of years ago. What does that mean in the long run? Probably if it's a conservation practice and it's good for soil health or water quality or carbon sequestration, you can probably get funding for it. Through that program funds these other programs. That overarching program funds all these programs I talked about. But you'll see that the vast majority of that is in EQIP and RCPP and a little bit in CSP. So it's out there for conservation practices. It'd be that 1 year at a time or long-term commitments. What kind of practices are eligible for funding through the Inflation Reduction Act? It's got to be, quote, practices that yield climate change mitigation benefits. That's not my quote, but that's how the language reads. So what does that mean? What's going to be eligible for Inflation Reduction Act funding? And that's a separate pool of money, same kind of practices, but the practice has to either improve soil health, improve nitrogen fertilizer use efficiency, or reduce methane emissions from livestock. So that's kind of a new one that you couldn't get funding for. It needs to sequester carbon in perennial biomass. In other words, you plant something that's going to be out there more than a couple of years, and it'll sequester carbon. It needs to improve energy and fuel use efficiency or restore wetlands. you don't see something in there that just says slow erosion control, not to say that doesn't benefit from some practices that you would put in to improve soil health, but it's not specific. You're not going to get cost share funding through Inflation Reduction Act for terraces or grassland waterways, something like that. But you will for, so what does that mean for what practices are eligible for IRA funding, I'm going to call it from now on? Cover crops, no-till, conservation crop rotations, that's where you would incorporate an annual or a small grain or a perennial crop in that rotation along with your annual cash crops. So get oats or rye or any other small grain is probably the most common. There'll be cost share funding for that. Nutrient management to more efficiently utilize nitrogen and phosphate fertilizers in particular. Pasture and hay planting, prescribed grazing systems or managed intensive grazing systems, fencing, watering systems, that sort of thing. Tree and shrub establishment, planting trees, improving woodland stands, or restoring wetlands. At this point, I'll turn it over to Devon. Devon is going to give you the lowdown on state cost share funding opportunities.
Yeah, is this thing on yet? Nope.
Here's one.
How do we turn it on?
Well, that's a good question, yeah.
How about now?
Yeah, there you go.
There we go. Okay, yeah, so I'm going to just kind of piggyback off of what Doug just talked about. Doug mentioned a lot of our federal programs and federal cost share through the NRCS, and I'm going to touch a little bit on the state cost share program. So there are a lot going on with the state government funding these types of programs and a lot going on with the federal government funding these types of programs. We'll just talk through the differences between the two. So starting off, I work with the Rock Creek Watershed Project, and specifically with the Mitchell Soil and Water Conservation District. And our governing state body is the Iowa Department of Agriculture and Land Stewardship, with the Division of Soil and Water Conservation. So some things that some programs that we have at the state cost share level through IDOLS are our IFIT programs, our REAP program, WQI, Water Quality Incentive, Water Quality and Infrastructure Fund, and each of those programs kind of has a different use, right? So we're going to talk through kind of some of the objectives, the practices, and the incentives for each of these different programs. So looking at IFIP, a lot of times we use IFIP for more of our structural practices, but there are also temporary practices. So when I mention temporary, our infield conservation, we're talking about cover crops, no-till, strip-till, nutrient management. And when I mention structural practices, I mean more things like grass waterways, water and sediment control basins, wetlands, things like that that have a longer lifespan. So some of the temporary practices that IFIP offers are the ones that Doug just talked about, the more common cover crops, no-till, strip-till, and contour farming. And with some of the permanent practices being our grade stage structures, waterways, WASCOBs, that's our water and sediment control basins, aka ponds, windbreaks, tree plantings, pasture and hay plantings, and conservation cover plantings. So conservation cover planting, the most commonly utilized area for that would be a corner of a field that's tough to turn around on. We can pay you to take that quarter acre out of production and plant some native grasses or native forbs or so forth. So something for you to turn around on that you don't have to worry about getting a poor crop off of that quarter acre at the corner of the field. So looking into some of these practices, we'll start with REAP, the Resource Enhancement and Protection. So that's right in the name of it, resource enhancement. This program is really utilized for those areas of the farm that aren't already cropped. So it's hard to get into CRP if you don't have that cropping history, but maybe you want to enhance your pasture, enhance the grassland, enhance some form of your timber. This is the program that we would use for with REAP. And so what REAP is we'll cover 50% in cost share of the estimated cost of whatever restoration project that you want to do. Now moving forward to the Water Quality Initiative, this is the more common program that we'll use here in Mitchell County. That's what we'll go for with our cover crops, our no-till, strip-till, and nitrification inhibitors, also nutrient management. And so that's just, that program was put in place by IDOLS to implement Iowa's nutrient reduction strategy in reducing nitrogen or phosphorus from our surface bodies, or surface water bodies. And so when we get into the water quality initiative, that's also pretty big slice of the pie when it comes to state cost share. I'd say that would be like 60 to 75% of applications that we do around here through WQI. And then with WQI came the Water Quality Infrastructure Fund. It's kind of tagged on to WQI, and that's for some more infrastructure type projects, our bioreactors, saturated buffers, wetlands, and restored wetlands and constructed wetlands. And so that fund was put together by IDOLS to sort of better coordinate the construction of these practices, building them in a mass batch and build type style versus one-on-one. So let's get into eligibility. When we're talking about state cost share eligibility, it's a different conversation than talking about federal cost share eligibility. In terms of state cost share, listed as an owner-operator of the land. If you're a first-time user, we'll pay you a better rate than if you've used it before. We'll pay you kind of a half rate. But that's something that is easy to get into. It's a one-time trip to the office, sign the application, bring us back in your bills in the fall, and you receive a payment usually a week to 2 weeks after your bills get brought back in. In terms of federal cost share and eligibility for the NRCS programs, there's a little bit more that goes into that. Looking past into 5-6 years in the past, the cropping history, their practice history on that land, your farm data reports with FSA, and there's a lot more paperwork, and so it is a bit lengthier of a process for the federal programs, but you'll get rewarded a little bit better in terms of your financial help with those programs. So, we just wanted to touch too on some non-governmental organizations that offer cost share for cover crops. This year, 2023, was the first year that there had been such a thing, with Practical Farmers of Iowa offering a $10 an acre for endless amounts of acres you can enroll up to, however many. There's no maximum cap on the amount of acres you can enroll. And that is non-governmental organization. It was an online sign-up. Send in the acres, send in your bills, and receive payment. And so that was pretty slick. We had a handful of producers utilize that this year, and they all thought that was a pretty seamless process. And that'll be coming back again in 2024. So that's just another way you can get a little bit of a payment for trying out cover crops, whether it be for the first time, or you could be on year 5 and get this payment as well. So getting back to the in-field conservation practices, how can we, the mission of the Iowa Department of Agriculture and Land Stewardship is to maintain agricultural productivity while improving the soil health and the water quality. So looking at in-field conservation, we can add a cover crop in between our cash crops. We can reduce our tillage, whether we're no-tilling beans and strip-tilling corn, or we're a full no-tilling operation. There's always room for improvement in the infield. Conservation crop rotations, Doug kind of touched on that, whether that be adding a cereal rye or adding an oats in and harvesting that seed along with the corn and soybeans. And now you're at conservation crop rotation, you can collect a payment there too. Ways for utilizing nutrient management. We look at the 4 R's when it comes to nutrient management: right place, right source, right time, and the right rate. And if you're willing to want to get into one of those plans and follow one of those plans, we offer cost share for that as well. Same with grass waterways, pasture, hayland, woodland practices. All those things have a program available at the state cost share level. So getting into come to the incentives of cover crops, with IDOLS and WQI, we offer a $25 an acre payment for a first-time cover crop user and a $15 an acre payment if you've used it in the past. And that's a program where you come in and you sign up annually and you receive that payment because you know it's going to be there. There's no ranking and assessment and having to wait to know if you're going to get funded once you sign up. So once you sign that piece of paper, you know that you're getting funded when it comes to your state cost share. Like I said, it's a 1-year agreement, an annual sign-up, and there is 160 acre max per producer. So if you and your dad farm together, or you and your brother farm together, each of you could sign up 160 acres. Like I mentioned earlier, Practical Farmers of Iowa, PFI there, they offered the $10 an acre one-year agreement. There was no acreage limit on that. You could sign up as many acres as you had that you planted to cover crop on. And then getting into EQIP, RCPP, our federal programs, and CSP, like Doug talked about, I mentioned those programs are a little bit more in-depth in terms of eligibility and signing up, but they do offer a better rate and a little bit more bang for your buck. What you can see here, you can get up to $92 an acre for planting and cover crops through EQIP and RCPP versus the $25 an acre through WQI state cost share. So no-till, strip-till payments. WQI offered $10 an acre at 160 acre limit. Same deal with WQI, it's 160 acres per producer, no matter the practice. EQIP RCPP offered $16 to $20 an acre this year in 2024 for whether that be no-till or strip-till. The NRCS considers no-till and strip-till the same practice. So it'd be $16 to $20 whether you're strip-tilling your corn and no-tilling beans. You get that same payment both years. Conservation crop rotations, PFI will pay up to $20 an acre on no capped acres if you're willing to add in that small grain, that third crop into your rotation. As well as EQIP and RCPP, our federal programs, paying $11 to $35 an acre with no limit. So that's just there to help if you're thinking about trying one of these things. If you want to grow a small grain for Dean or for TJ, this is a program that would help you out and maybe put a little bit of the bill on making that transition. Nutrient management, we talked about the right source, right rate, right time, and right place. There's payments for that through our state cost share and federal cost share. $3 an acre for a nitrification inhibitor that you put in the fall. 1-year agreement on 160 acres. PFI will pay $20 an acre for an inhibitor, and that's on unlimited acres. And EQIP RCPP will pay up to $74 an acre for a nutrient management plan. That's not a nitrification inhibitor, that's a nutrient management plan. And so same with CSP. You've noticed here on the last few slides, CSP will have numerous options underneath it. And that's because there literally are hundreds and hundreds of options for all of these main practices we talked about: cover crop, no-till, strip-till, nutrient management. With CSP, each of those programs has 100 different ways you could take it. And so that's kind of the beauty of getting to that point in CSP where you solve some of these resource concerns, whether it be through state cost share or EQIP and RCPP, and you've made that final step to CSP. That's where Doug talked about you're benefiting from that, because when you enter into CSP, you immediately are getting rewarded for the conservation you've already done. And then we're providing hundreds of options for you to improve on throughout that 5-year contract. Grass waterways, IDALs and IFIP, state cost share will pay 50% of the estimated cost for constructing a grass waterway. CRP will pay 50% upfront, and then through the SIP and different payments, it ends up to be like right at 95% cost shared for the practice. And then on top of it, you get that rental rate for the length of the contract. And the beauty in that is they're able to be renewed. And so you could have a 10-year contract in a grass waterway. The idea with that grass waterway is it's going to be there for permanence, and CRP has finally changed so they can allow to renew that waterway and keep it into perpetuity, basically, or until you decided that you needed to redo it or put it somewhere else. Pasture and hay planting, prescribed grazing, that's something that a lot of these programs have been picking up on, allowing to pay for water sources, fencing off crop fields, fencing off old retired pasture. These programs want to help pay for those things now because we're realizing the benefits of implementing cattle into the field. You can do the no-till and the strip-till and the cover crop, but when you add cattle and livestock into the mix and you're grazing it, the benefits go through the roof and they come a lot faster. So our leadership is starting to realize that, and we're incorporating a lot of those practices into these programs. And then the tree and shrub establishment, we do a lot of windbreaks, almost solely through REAP. They'll pay 75% on our windbreaks, up to $1,600. And so we do a lot of windbreaks in the county, planting a lot of different of those and using REAP a lot. So we're very gracious for that REAP program. That's a program that the legislation has to renew every year. So they're going through that right now in Iowa legislation, whether they're going to renew REAP and how much money is going to go into REAP. And so that's something that we're paying attention to because we do use that program a lot for not necessarily infield, but farmstead practices. Back to Doug.
You saw in there, particularly for the equip RCPP, there's a range of financial assistance level. And the reason for that being, it could be something as simple as a winter kill oat cover crop, all the way to a multi-species winter hardy cover crop. And so there's a range in there of what it actually costs to implement that practice. And so equip and RCPP cost sharing have commensurate range in financial incentive that goes with it. And there are so many of them, like Devon was saying, that we didn't want to bore you with a whole table of numbers. But your best bet is, and particularly with the CSP program, is sit down with NRCS and determine what your objectives are, work with NRCS to develop a plan of action for whatever conservation practice or practices you have, and then that's the time to find out what program would fit best for financial assistance as an incentive. Wanted to touch a bit on edge of field practices. Some of you may be somewhat familiar with these practices. I suspect some of you maybe never heard of some of them because we're talking about not new technology, but kind of new to agriculture. And the water quality infrastructure, along with RCPP programs, there's a lot of financial incentive out there to put these practices in with up to 100% cost share, and in specific watersheds like Devon and I work in. I can't speak for the edge of field practices financial assistance in the Rock Creek watershed. I can tell you that in the Charles City watershed, financial assistance has been combined with different sources to cover 100% of the cost to put those in. And in some cases, all it takes is a state cost share practice, state cost share funding to cover 100% of the saturated buffer in particular, but I'll talk about that. But what are these edge of field practices? They are practices that are designed to intercept tile water before it leaves the field and reduce the nitrate concentration in that tile water. And that's kind of specifically how, that's the benefit that you need to be able to see to be able to utilize these practices. Saturated buffer. Without getting into a lot of detail here, a saturated buffer intercepts the tile line, distributes the water in a tile system, tile line that runs parallel to the stream body, the creek or the drainage ditch, and allows for that tile water that would otherwise go directly to the stream to be diverted into the tile line that runs parallel to the creek, and then that water moves laterally through the soil profile on its way to the creek. And in that time frame, a lot of the nitrates are reduced in that tile water by biological activity in the soil, as well as some plant uptake. That's kind of what they look like when you're putting them in. When they're done, you don't even know they're there except for a little water control structure. So, not going into a lot of detail. If you're interested in, say, taking the next step to enhance the nitrate or the nutrient management on a farm or a field, above and beyond even what cover crops and no-till and small grains and that can do, these can help to further reduce potential loss to that stream. Cutting off, they usually reduce about 50% of the nitrates. What's available out there? You can get 100% cost share through IDAL's Water Quality Initiative. Hardly anybody goes after CRP or EQIP because you can get 100% right away. We've had plenty of money to cover that. A denitrifying bioreactor does the same thing, intercepts the tile line, but instead of it diverting tile water into a tile system that runs parallel to the stream, it diverts it into a pit full of wood chips. And those wood chips, the bacteria that grows on those accomplishes the same thing as what a saturated buffer, as what the bacteria in the soil would do through a saturated buffer. So bioreactors, again, they catch the tile water, they usually reduce a minimum of 50%. It's been our experience of the nitrates in that water. It's another practice that maybe you don't have the appropriate soil for a saturated buffer. It's too sandy or it's too high a clay content. You can utilize a bioreactor. We've typically been paying 100% cost share by combining RCPP and WQI money. Again, throwing out acronyms, but combining fundings. Wood chip bioreactor pit being constructed. Again, financial incentives for those. You can get 75% through the state. CRP, I didn't mention CRP for saturated buffers, but you can put bioreactors and saturated buffers on an existing CRP filter strip that you might have there, and CRP will pay for 50% of that, and Water Quality Initiative will pay for the other 50%. Same thing's true for bioreactors. If you have a CRP filter strip, because again, these practices are located right next to the stream or the drainage ditch, where you may already have a CRP filter strip, you can put a bioreactor on that filter strip and it just gets flipped over to a bioreactor for the name of the practice. And we combine funding. If you didn't want to utilize either of those two programs and you just wanted to use the EQIP or RCPP program, you could get cost share funding for those. It usually covers 50 to 75% of the actual cost of putting it in. Again, we combine sources of income. One thing I wanted to touch back on as far as combining sources of funding, some of these non-profit organizations, non-governmental organizations like Practical Farmers of Iowa and PF, you may be able to actually piggyback their cost share on top of what you're getting through a state or a USDA cost share program. Again, research that, but there are individuals that you can piggyback that and use both of them. Wetland restorations is another practice that is highly encouraged and ranks real well for federal or state cost share funding. Again, to get the cost share funding, the idea is to intercept the tile line, route it through the oxbow wetland, and then that will denitrify the water that's coming into it. Oxbow is simply an old stream channel that no longer has the water flowing through it. It's probably filled in with sediment over time, and the cost share funding is used to excavate that back out to what it was before, allow stream water to backflow into it, and particularly when you get your tile line to go into it, the water that goes into that wetland from the tile line, my experience with other wetlands is when you have an average rainfall year, average to below rainfall year, the nitrate reduction is incredible. It's up in the 90% reduction in nitrate concentration if it goes through a wetland. These are very effective, very long-term practices. That just happens to be one of hesitancy. When they get revegetated, they're revegetated with native grasses, and they're excellent wildlife habitat. Again, you can get 50% cost share through IDALs. We usually piggyback EQIP or RCPP with that to make it 100% because you can combine about anything with IDALs funding for these edge of field practices to boost it up to 100%. And CRP, again, if you happen to have a place where it's in CRP already, and then denitrifying constructed wetlands. These are going into an area and actually building a wetland. Some of you may be familiar with the big Conservation Reserve Enhancement Program or CREP wetlands. We happen to have a lot of those up in this area, but those are just large-scale wetlands where we go in and develop a wetland. And the idea behind that is to take all the tile water that's coming into that watershed, allow it to flow through a wetland, and where then the anaerobic bacteria in that wetland digest the nitrates, turn it into nitrogen gas, goes right back up in the atmosphere, reduces the concentration of nitrates in that in that tile water. Extremely effective. There's a lot of programs that are out there for that. Everything from 50% cost share for a small wetland to 100% cost share when you combine some funding. And there's also, if the wetland area, the watershed area is big enough, there are 30-year and permanent easement agreements you can enter into with the USDA or Iowa Department of Ag Land Stewardship, where they'll pay an easement payment on top of 100% of all of the costs to restore that wetland or create that wetland. So there's very inviting, I'll call it, potential if that's the case. But that would be the bigger wetlands. Throw a lot of numbers, a lot of acronyms, a lot of names at you. At the back table there, I have, Devon and I have a quick reference sheet for what these programs are. And Dean's got a copy right there, so grab one of those, contact one of us, contact your local NRCS office, and get started on helping to understand what those programs are. I want to put in a shameless plug for a workshop, we're calling it, that's coming up here March 7th at the Floyd County Fairgrounds. We're calling it the Soil Health and Planters Setup Workshop. And we'll have some speakers there, some well-known speakers, some local implement dealers, some local cover croppers, I'll call them, local no-tillers and strip tillers, telling their story. And it's free to the public if you're interested in going to that. Again, March 7th. I've got a sheet back there. I have a table that you can grab. There's a phone number you can call. There's a QR code you can click onto the phone and go to register. Is that my cue? I'm done? I didn't see you giving me the forewarning yet, Dave. But anyway, this would be a great workshop that you could pick up some cues and talk to and learn from your neighbors who are doing it already and share stories. That's how we learn. Again, thank you, Dean.
We're kind of running tight on time, so we'll probably, if you got any questions, catch them. They're going to be around here for a while. They did a great job. We normally put these people at the end of the program, but most of you are in a hurry to go home or whatever. And if you notice, we gave them only a half an hour. They did 40 minutes. I thought that's pretty good. So when you're looking for funding, don't expect it's going to be a 5-minute conversation, right? Have you ever had a 5-minute conversation with somebody? I don't think so. I wouldn't. This sheet is really helpful. It's amazing with what they just went through. It's all right here. The other thing I wanted to point out is we're very fortunate in this group. We have a CREP wetland producer or owner. Where's Jared? Where's he at? Back there. On their farm, they have a CREP. But we also have a number of wetland restoration programs on Rock Creek. We also have a bioreactor. A couple of people have that. The Amundsons and Norbies have one or two. You got one or two. Where's Neil? Neil's actually showed me an envelope he got today or yesterday, and it shows the report on what his bioreactor is doing, how much nitrogen it's actually taking out. So maybe you can help him decipher it, ask him if he wants to share those numbers with you. We're very fortunate in the Rock Creek, and Devon will be able to direct you to see the saturated buffers that we have installed and the mini bioreactors that we have on the Rock Creek. So we're going to take a 10-minute break. We're running a little bit late, but that's okay. That was a lot of good information. Thank you, guys. So we'll be back in about 10 minutes.